won't surprise you, but I'm a little bit upset with Harry and Meghan. Oh, okay.
Not again, Matt.
Not for the usual
Another
reasons. Right, not for the usual reasons. But they have changed the name from Archwell Foundation, okay, to a word that I really struggle to say, Archewell Philanthropies. It doesn't roll off, thank you very much. I practiced, by the way. I practiced so many times on the way in today. To Archwell Philanthropies. It doesn't roll off the tongue.
No.
It's another rebrand. We've had Meghan having to rebrand from American Riviera Orchard to As Ever. We've got all sorts. I mix up the TV show with the lifestyle brand. What does this mean, Archwell Philanthropies? Where are they going with this?
Well, I'm sure Harry didn't choose that title because he couldn't even spell it, let alone know what it is.
Harsh.
Harsh but true. So I don't know. You know, the most important thing about branding, and you know, I'm in PR allegedly, is you get a brand, you stick to it, so it's embedded in people's psyche, not change it every 2 minutes. So I don't know whose advice that they're taking, but it wouldn't be the advice that I would give.
The spelling's difficult. The definition's quite difficult as well. I mean, it's good works, I suppose, but it's an umbrella term to cover all of their good works. But as you say, there have been so many rebrands since the days of Sussex Royal, which they were then not allowed to use because they weren't working members of the royal family anymore. It's just one thing after another, isn't it?
Do you think they know which direction they're going? Because just on this philanthropies, they say, well, so there's a new chapter, they're telling us, because they're now called a fiscal sponsor model, which appears to be they'll be giving out money. That's the idea. So they've kind of changed from like a charity or a foundation to a legal system where they're giving out money. But do you think do you think the fact they keep changing their names and brands, do you think they're struggling to find what direction they're going in?
I think you're absolutely right. I do think they're struggling. You know, you talked earlier about what Prince Andrew does on a daily basis. What does Prince Harry do? You know, what do they actually do? Meghan is clearly making her Netflix programme, but what does he do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, in the next few weeks, he'll be in London at the Royal Courts of Justice for the next court case.
Preparing for a legal case at the moment.
Spoiler alert. But that's the third big one he's had against a newspaper group. When he was here in September and he did those 4 days of engagements, we saw classic Harry back in the saddle, doing what he's great at, and it was a real blast from the past. Going back to California, I always think about the Netflix contract, the multi-zillion-dollar Netflix contract. They are going to want, you know, there's only so many polo documentaries and cake decoration documentaries they're going to accept. Sooner or later, they're going to want something royal. And Harry said he won't do any more, but watch this space.
Who knows?
There is potential for 2027 Princess Diana documentary. So there has been talks in the background. We've reported it in the past that it's a potential idea, and that's because that'll be the 40th anniversary. My maths are bad.
Yeah.
30th, 40th,
yeah.
30th anniversary of the death of Princess Diana that he could fall upon.
Yeah.
I can't see William wanting to take part in anything like that.
No, and also, in fairness, both boys have said so often, this is the last time we're going to talk about it. So if there's going to be another documentary on the 30th anniversary, that'll be the last time they talk about it there. I mean, there is new stuff to consider about Diana's final years and what we now know about the Panorama interview and so on. And by the way, everything that Harry's done and William have done since stems from that and how Diana was treated and how their wives are treated. So you always have to see it in that sort of prism, I think.
But that would be what Netflix would want.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We'll talk about money briefly, because this idea that Archwell Foundation is now Archwell Philanthropies, there's a suggestion that they were in the red. So I'll read out some figures. So the charity has reported that it's $2.5 million, which is £1.8 million in the red, after incurring its highest expenditure in 2024. But Archwell claim that it was a year of significant programme investment for Archwell Foundation after a period of strong fundraising, reserve building, so they haven't lost money. They're just using funds, previously raised funds for intended purpose. Quite confusing, but is money an issue, do you think, out there with Archwell and Harry and Meghan?
It doesn't sound very good to me. I'm no mathematician at all, but it sounds like PR gobbledygook, if I'm absolutely
Maybe
honest.
it's the way I delivered it.
And you're the expert.
It does sound very confusing. And of course, again, going back to branding, they rely on their brand to actually get the money in. And if the brand is constantly switching, I can see revenue dropping.
I don't know. I mean, with Spotify and Netflix and the various business ventures, it is confusing with the numbers. Yeah, pick a number. Well, we'll find out when we see what they're doing in the coming year. That will be your answer. What sort of projects they agree to, and whether they are becoming of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex.
What philanthropic endeavours that they decide to invest in.
Let's start with the oldest tabloid trick in the book, because once you see it, you'll spot it everywhere. They take something routine, technical, and frankly boring, and they inflate it into a narrative of collapse. An administrative clarification becomes a PR disaster. A structural update becomes another blunder. That's exactly what's happening here. Archewell Foundation, updating its operating name to Archewell Philanthropies, is not a meltdown, not a crisis, and certainly not a sign of panic. It is a clarification of how the organisation already functions, and that distinction matters. Notice what they very carefully avoid saying outright. Archewell did not shut down. Archewell did not fail and relaunch. Archewell did not rebrand because donors fled or money dried up. None of that is true, and that's why it's never stated plainly. Instead, they rely on tone, mockery and implication to lead listeners to a conclusion without evidence. What actually happened is straightforward. Archwell clarified its umbrella structure to reflect funding distribution, fiscal sponsorship, and program investment across multiple initiatives. That is standard practice in the non-profit and philanthropic world, especially for organizations operating internationally and under constant scrutiny. Major foundations do this all the time. The Gates Foundation, Rockefeller, Ford. When they adjust structures, it's called governance. When Harry and Meghan do it, tabloids call it chaos. That isn't analysis. That's narrative enforcement. Now, let's address the mockery, because it sets the tone for everything that follows. They change the name, and I can't pronounce it. That's not insight. That's not commentary. That's not journalism. That's just vibes dressed up as expertise. Philanthropies is not an obscure or invented word. It is literally the name of the sector. If someone whose job is to comment on public institutions struggles with it, that reflects a lack of preparation, not a branding failure. And notice the arrogance baked into the joke. The idea that Harry and Meghan should shape their legal and organisational decisions around whether a tabloid presenter finds the wording catchy or easy to say on air. Serious charities do not choose names based on how well they roll off the tongue during a snarky panel discussion. They choose names that reflect scope, legality and accountability. The joke isn't harmless. It's designed to trivialise competence and replace it with ridicule. Tabloids love to compress timelines because it creates the illusion of instability. Years of context get flattened into a single breathless sentence. They're always rebranding. But when you slow it down, the story collapses. Sussex Royal ended because they were legally forced to stop using it. That wasn't a choice. It was a restriction imposed on them. Archewell launched as a broad umbrella covering philanthropy, media and production. Archewell. Philanthropies is not a new invention. It's a clarification of the charitable arms structure within that umbrella. That is not constant rebranding. That is compliance, separation of functions and governance. Businesses and non-profits do this routinely, especially when operating across jurisdictions and under microscope-level media scrutiny. The only reason it's framed as confusion here is because tabloids need the audience to believe Harry and Meghan are flailing, lost and reactive. They're not flailing, they're formalising. And those are not the same thing. This is where the panel accidentally exposes itself. They ask, with exaggerated concern, do they even know which direction they're going in? And then, almost immediately, they explain that Archewell is operating under a fiscal sponsor model, distributing funds raised for specific programs. That is the direction. They literally answer their own question, and then refuse to accept the answer because it doesn't fit the chaos narrative they're invested in selling. What they actually mean is not, do Harry and Meghan know what they're doing? What they mean is, why aren't Harry and Meghan doing something we approve of? That isn't confusion. That's entitlement. It's the assumption that Harry and Meghan owe the public, or worse, the tabloids, a version of philanthropy that feels familiar, submissive, and controllable. Chapter 5. The laziest attack. What does Harry even do? This line is a classic because it's easy and it sounds clever, but it collapses under even minimal scrutiny. What does Harry do all day? Well, let's look at what they themselves admit, even while trying to belittle him. He is actively engaged in multiple legal cases against powerful media organisations. He oversees charitable funding and programme investment. He participates in international advocacy. He develops projects tied to veterans, mental health and media accountability. He has contractual media obligations that require production, oversight and long-term planning. But here's the trick. Legal accountability is framed as doing nothing, while ceremonial appearances are framed as service. One threatens the system, the other protects it. That's the difference. Harry isn't idle. He's inconvenient. This section isn't reporting, it's projection. They openly admit Netflix wants something royal. They openly admit Harry has said he won't do that anymore. And then they smirk and say, watch this space. That's not journalism. That's wish-casting. They want Harry to cross his own boundaries so they can accuse him of hypocrisy later. If he refuses, they call him difficult. If he agrees, they call him exploitative. Either way, the attack is pre-written. And let's be clear, Netflix signed Harry and Meghan knowing exactly where their red lines were. Invictus, polo, documentary storytelling, lived experience. Those are deliberate choices, not desperation. The frustration you're hearing isn't about content, it's about control. The Diana speculation is particularly revealing and particularly ugly. They acknowledge that both sons have repeatedly said, "This is the last time." Then, without irony, they immediately suggest, "But Netflix would want it." That's not concern for Diana's legacy. That's exploitation. Harry has been explicit about refusing to repeat the abuse cycle that destroyed his mother. And yet the panel even admits that everything Harry and William do stems from how Diana was treated. And still refuses to connect the dots. They recognise the trauma, but resent the boundaries it created. Now we come to the most dishonest framing of all: money. Archewell reported a deficit because it spent previously raised funds on programs. That is not debt. That is not failure. That is not struggling for cash. That is literally how non-profits function. The panel reads out the explanation and still implies crisis. That tells you everything. They don't want the truth. They want the headline. And when they dismiss it as PR gobbledygook, notice how they never explain which part is false, because it isn't. The conversation about Archie and Lilibet exposes the deepest hypocrisy. They demand visibility. Then they acknowledge privacy is important. Then they complain again. There is no version of this where Harry and Meghan win, because the demand isn't really about photos, it's about access. Harry and Meghan are doing exactly what William once demanded for himself: controlled exposure and firm boundaries. The difference is institutional protection. Harry no longer has it, so the same behaviour is framed as suspicious instead of sensible. That's not concern, that's control. Here's the truth they circle but never state plainly. Harry and Meghan are not failing. They are refusing to perform. They won't bleed for headlines. They won't sell access to their children. They won't play royal pantomime on demand. And tabloids cannot stand that. So every administrative update becomes a scandal. Every boundary becomes confusion. Every investment year becomes financial trouble. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. This was never really a podcast about Archewell. It was a podcast about losing control over Harry and Meghan. And that's why they're angry.